Hello and welcome. I want to talk in this video about Barbarossa and the impact his videos have had on me personally. In this video it's not a tribute, it's not even a thank you, as I'm sure he'd say himself that he's simply stepping up and doing what needs to be done. But what I want to do is to state how Barbarossa's insights have impacted on my life directly. And I can't possibly comment on every video he's done. I mean, his body of work is too expansive. But I can make reference to the words that have resonated the most with me. And this is going to be a companion piece to my upcoming Systema video, as my awakening as a man went hand in hand with my practice of Systema philosophy and interacting with other men and hearing their experiences, and also voices such as Barbarossa's. A number of years ago, I backed myself into a corner, and I burnt every bridge I had, and I'd nearly died. I'd been in a coma, and I had to rebuild myself physically, mentally, and I was forced to confront a lot of ugly truths about society and myself. But moreover, I had questions, and I was searching for answers in all the wrong places, and also online, trying to find the voices of other men who'd experienced society as I had up until that point. Because I knew, it couldn't just be me. There had to be other men out there who had questions. There had to be. And I found the truth through serious introspection, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say that Barbarossa wasn't a guiding light in many respects. And he was an annoyance in many respects. I hated him at times. And it's strange to say that. He was a disembodied voice, but at times, I felt true rage towards him. And at the time, I was coming out of a very dark place, where, essentially I was set on self-destruct. And I'd listen to his videos, and I'd be struck with a mixture of shame and hope. His voice was like a machine gun assault of pure truth, and no apologies. And when I first watched his videos, I didn't digest them. I didn't believe, or I just refused to allow myself to see him as genuine. I convinced myself that he was a charlatan, that he wasn't living by his words. But that was my own projection, because I couldn't deny the truth he dispelled. It was just easier to run from it. And there's been a lot of references to the Matrix and the Manosphere, for lack of a better word. And I can understand why, as it's a complete moment of rendering, where all of what you knew as the truth has been eradicated. And that's the moment of truth I had when watching Barbarossa's video, the post-feminism man. After that I watched video after video of his, and every one of them was like a fist to the face. I was punch drunk by the end. And at the time I'd been privileged to pay witness to men in group settings, relating their pain, relating their experiences. And I initially rejected these men's pain. It was too much for me to bear. I didn't want to take on anyone else's pain. Not at that time, not after what I've been through. But I couldn't deny it. And through these experiences, I finally came to accept the male experience as valid. And it was at this point that Barbarossa's words truly hit home. It was an aligning of thought, emotion, and action. Words are meaningless unless you take the actions to make them a reality. And what I wanted to touch on in this video is some of the defining truths for me from Barbarossa's work. What his work is, it's a resource for men. It's a voice echoing out of the darkness to give meaning and hope to men. And Baba, no doubt he's a very intelligent, he's a very astute man. And he's no doubt a degree of insight into how his words have affected men. But I want to put it into perspective. And I'll be quoting some passages of Barbarossa's work as we go on. Baba, he talks of women's responses to any man expressing his male sovereignty, and that this female response is to threaten that male with nihilism. Call it an autoimmune response from a hive mind. And that if you want to threaten female privilege, women will respond with threats designed to destroy you completely in the genetic sense. And if you devalue this sexual and reproductive access to females, this will be viewed as a collective threat to all women. As Barbarossa states, even if a man has fathered a son, the female will do all she can to prevent the father passing on his identity, his wisdom, and his love to his son. And for the female, this is the acceptable price of doing business. Quote, "I present you a picture that delves past crimson lipstick and carnal female beauty, holding a mirror up to the very essence of what it means to be female." And the ugly truth, is that very, very few men, even in the manosphere, will accept this truth. They'll instead fight and tear other men down to prevent from seeing this truth with their own eyes. And we see it now with a number of men online, clambering desperately at the at the remnants of a sinking ship, painting MGTOW as extremists or whatever. But we have too much momentum to be ignored now. And the shaming tactics, they're not working. And our fight is one where we claim our autonomy. And as Barbarossa states, we deprive society of every last damned expectation they have of us. No wonder they're beginning to panic. Everything they base their identity on is being ripped out from under them. Barbarossa, he put it very aptly, that only one sex stepped up and did what had to be done, in a way that bettered humanity, while the other saw fit for the last century to classify this as just an exercise in the oppression of women. Quote, "I would tell women they should be ashamed of themselves if I had any evidence that throughout human history they had any capacity for it. Sex for resources. Traditionalism. It's the world's oldest profession. And beware the woman that pined for the good old days of traditional relationships. See them for the deceptive, selfish parasites that they are. Those who will let you slowly degrade your male vitality and health to make things easier for them. And this ties into something I've wrestled with my whole life, and what Barbarossa and Stardust have placed great focus on. It's male mother need. That conditioning that devalues a man's conception of himself to the point where a woman's validation is the only thing that provides him any sense of self-worth. The sense of loss that I have personally, all those years staring into the abyss. As Barbarossa stated, there is no mother coming to save you. And it's a weakness that every man has to overcome so he can finally claim his autonomy and stand on his own 2 feet. One of the most important things a man has to do, and most don't, is to free themselves from this desire. Because women resent your weakness. You perform, or you're an outcast. So define your own purpose and walk your own path. Because, you can either lay in the corner like a simpering lapdog, or you can take your power back. Those are your choices. Barbarossa stated that men's weakness is his failure to see through this illusion and to see just how disposable and resented we truly are. And this desperate need for approval and validation, it's gutted men of the instinct for self-preservation. As man-woman myth stated, women have unpaid bodyguards wherever they go. Men willing to sacrifice their lives for a female they've never met, just so that they can die validated. And these following words by Barbarossa, they really struck me, because I'd never heard a man ever express this. And that's that the system is not designed for male contentedness. It doesn't want your happiness. It wants you to feel incomplete, and it feeds off your insecurity. It needs you to question yourself. It needs you to be in constant fear. That was the moment I felt a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders, because I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one. It was a moment of clarity in the haze. And what Barbar spoke of, he spoke of a sustained attack on men to separate and disenfranchise males, to remove them from children's lives and to isolate and disempower them. The end result of which will be men turning their backs on a society that will, to the bitter end, hate men for doing so. And, I mean, it's a controversial view, but how can Barbarossa's perspective be denied? I mean, that women have no concept of masculinity outside the scope of how they can benefit from it. And that this testing of your manhood by women, it never ends. They will constantly test your resolve to see if you will falter, so they can gauge whether you can continue to provide for them. I mean, it doesn't leave much room for compassion or understanding on a woman's part. As Barbarossa said, even if you do provide, they will resent you for doing so. And what we're seeing now, I mean, the level of violence and hatred being directed at both men and boys, and the dismissive attitude of women towards male suffering, it's ample evidence of this. But the most powerful thing that Barbarossa ever said, at least in my eyes, and that resonated with me the deepest, was this: that there is a very real power and strength to be extracted from a man admitting to himself that he can and will experience vulnerability and moments of weakness. And this is not getting in touch with your feminine side, as that very saying proves the point, that any expression of vulnerability is associated with the female. But men will not truly understand their strengths until they are allowed to explore their weaknesses. And it's time we wrestle away the monopoly that women have on vulnerability. Because yes, men have historically been pillars of strength, but even Atlas shrugged. Now these words hit home very deeply for me. Now that along with male sovereignty, I want to introduce the concept of male vulnerability, in hopes that men begin to define it as a concept that is independent of all things feminine and is uniquely male. Now, if that isn't a call to arms, I don't know what is. I mean, you take back what was stolen from you, and you claim the right to own that. Barbarossa, he talked about a new man climbing out of the primordial ooze. And this, claiming this right, is the first step to self-ownership and male sovereignty. It's rejecting the indoctrination. And this is where the cycle stops. And this is where men reach out to other men. Where we look at the abuse that the men and boys suffer and we say that enough is enough. It's where we become whole. Barbarossa's dissection of male specification. I mean, again, this struck me. This struck me to the core. I mean, myself, I was target to a lot of it growing up, and it damaged me in many ways, and it set me on a path searching in vain for female approval, for motherly approval. And myself, like many young men who went through this, I hurt a lot of people in the process. I acted out, sometimes very, very, very violently and self-harming. I destroyed opportunities. The amount of destruction one man, who's been exposed to this psychological violence by his mother, can leave in his wake, it's immense. It's strange how we as a society, we can admit to the damage that men can do, but never to the positive effects a man can have on society. which is far more profound and far-reaching. If only society would stop for a single moment from denigrating men. Baba, he detailed the propensity for women to view children as resources. The mother, projecting onto the son the role of husband, in turn continuing a process of emasculation that she feels that she could never complete with his father. And of course she has full control of the resources coming into the home, so she can mentally destroy his son with impunity, and no one will pull her up on it. Because of course no one will dare say anything against single mothers, but the destruction that they can leave in their wake, it's reflected clearly in the prison population and in the crime stats. But here again, how can we address the problem if we can't admit it exists? A male mother need, as Barbarossa said, placing our faith in that one good female, instead of seeing women the way that they view us, as an emotionless and untiring renewable resource to be leached from. Men instead, they choose to magnify even the smallest act of something resembling kindness on the part of women as disproving of the overall trend of female usury against men. Because men, even in the manosphere, they do this. Singing the praises of females, calling for a return to the whoredom of traditionalism. In Barbarossa's video, the post-feminism man, he lays it bare. The feminism, they allowed women to show the worst parts of their nature. And this was the worst thing they could have done. Because more and more men now, they see females not with awe, but with suspicion. And feminism, it made women impossible to be around. So men now see women the only way that they can be viewed, as the sex objects that feminism claimed the patriarchy labelled them as. And that after a half a century of feminism, women now only hold a fraction of the appeal that they held in the days of fabricated oppression. Quote, "It's time to remove the tick, to extricate the leech. The tipping point is approaching." Barbarossa made the point that our identity as men, it's always been defined through a female filter, and then offered up to us in a very condensed box of chivalry and misandry. And the restrictions placed on male emotion, it's crippling, it's paralysing. And it has been for generations of men. Hordes of men akin to the walking dead. And in his own words, Barbarossa, he offers men, right here and now, a chance to contribute to a shift in male thought and attitude that will permeate the social consciousness, and already has. The copious misandric articles, the shaming tactics employed by other men against MGTOW, female attempts to co-opt, it's all proof positive. And questions, they're being put forward now by men. But for the first time in history, men are standing up as individuals and claiming their right to have an identity independent of female perception. As Baba stated, these questions, they can only be answered by men. Women, they can't have any input or say into how a man will run his life. Her expectations, they mean nothing. Her demands are the demands of a child stamping her feet. They carry no weight. And men, they can free themselves of the influence that women and society hold. Quote, "I say it's not only possible, but necessary. We discovered and split the atom. We can do anything we please." And Barbarossa's take on feminism is that it was an eventuality of technological advancement and traditional family norms, and that male qualities such as fidelity, loyalty, what have you, they've been projected onto women, when in truth, women were only there for their own children, their own protection and provision. Victimhood is power, and he was right. I mean, feminists, they provide women with privilege. And women, they provide feminism with political capital. It's symbiotic. And they take advantage of those privileges in order to disadvantage men. Now, point of fact, what can men offer other than equality? I mean, what incentive do women have to change? You know, the fact is, as Barbarossa stated, women don't need men. It's men who need women to prop up their false sense of utility, their identity, their purpose. Yeah, men, they're kept in a constant state of production by saturating them with sexual imagery, while making sex as scarce as possible and as risky as possible, illegally and financially. But really, I mean, is the carrot worth the chase? You know, quote, "The majority of women men come across are some of the most plain, uninteresting mental invalids the human species has ever produced." And he's right. And the women that take offense to this are more often than not a version of what he's just described. Now, they're pissed off that a man dares to say it out loud. And it's a valid point. I mean, what do women bring to the table other than risk and liability? You know, one thing that truly struck a chord with me. Now, I mean, at the time I was running through women, you know. I was still in a very negative space in my life. But this hit me hard. Barbarossa asked, how many women that you've dealt with as a man actually see you as a human being? Yeah, not a man existing to do things for women, but a human being. Yeah, how many women have said to you, in whatever expression it may take, that I know you exist, you're a human being, and I see you? Now, every man that's watching this video, regardless of your feelings towards Barbarossa or MGTOW, knows damn well the answer to that question. And he's right. I mean, as men, we try to satiate our loneliness with women. Yeah, I've done it. You've done it. Most still do it. And we project this idealism onto women. Yeah, myself, I'm very selective of the women that I engage with, because I'm dismissive of most. You know, they can't hold my attention. And in truth, I can't stomach being around the majority of them, for the most part. So it's very rare that to find that one girl that will turn my head. You know, it has to be a very powerful connection, as I want the most out of every interaction. But, I mean, in terms of priorities, women are a small component of my life. And the best relationships I've ever had have been with women who speak very little English. You know, in these interactions, there has to be more connection physically. And I think that happens very naturally. You know, you rely on sex to bridge that communication gap. Now, as Barbarossa said, that women, they have the Borg consensus, you know, an in-group gender preference. And quote, "Once you try to exploit us financially or emotionally, then don't be surprised when we treat you as nothing more than a walking cum receptacle. And don't think for a second that we can't recognize it. You're dealing with a new breed of man." And this is something else that I've touched on. I mean, women posing as allies to the cause of men's emancipation, who are really just working their own agenda. You know, backed up by an endless line of simping males kissing the ground that they walk on. Baba, I mean, he's right. He predicted this years ago. And they can't ignore us any longer. So they'll try the most common female tactic. They'll try to co-opt us. In a recent video of Barbarossa's, he spoke of how the male desire for freedom and adventure is in constant struggle with the male desire for freedom. How men opt for the suffocation and emasculation of marriage instead. You know, in the process, throwing their greatness, potential, and sense of adventure away. And if men instead focus their intellect towards advancing society, Instead of pandering to and carrying women, society would be advancing by leaps and bounds. In one of Barbarossa's videos, I can't recall which one, he quoted Lovecraft, and I read it as a battle cry. Quote, "Society's place for you men was to crawl and beg. Well, we're done crawling, and what ought to crawl has learnt to walk."